Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you're all having a good day. And as we start and as you join, feel free to say hello and let us know where you are tuning in from. So today I'm joined by a panel of educators, researchers, and authors in the field of self-compassion, mindfulness, and psychiatry, for a very important discussion on mental health in youth. So how can we improve the state of mental health in young people? So really important stuff. And just to let you know, if you've got any questions, hopefully there'll be some time at the end. So please do just pop them in the chat as they come to mind. So now I'm going to hand over to our chair, Jamie Lynn Tatera. Hi, Jamie Lynn.
Hello.
So good to have you. Really looking forward to this conversation. So I'll just introduce you and then I'll hand over to you. So Jamie Lynn Tatera is an educator and an author with a passion for helping children and their caregivers become more self-compassionate. She's taught mindfulness and self-compassion for children ages 3 to 18 in diverse schools, as well as aspiring teachers in UW Milwaukee's School of Education. Jamie Lynn is the developer and teacher trainer of the Self-Compassion for Children and Caregivers program and a research adaptation of the mindful self-compassion training. So very well placed to be chairing this discussion. Thank you so much, and I'll hand it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm grateful to all the people that are here with us right now and that'll be joining later. And we're here because we want to not only talk about the mental health challenges that kids are facing right now, but also how self-compassion can help and what we can actually do to help children become more mentally and emotionally resilient. So I'll actually introduce today's panel, which is North American based, and yet the research we'll be citing and the resources we'll be sharing are applicable across the globe. Our first panel member is Karen Bluth, who is a PhD, a mom of 2 adult daughters, and a former classroom teacher for almost 20 years. She is currently an associate professor at the University of North Carolina, where she explores the relationships between self-compassion and mental health, particularly among adolescents. She's the developer of several programs that focus on cultivating self-compassion, in particular, mindful self-compassion for teens, in which she trains teachers internationally. Dr. Bluth is also the author of 5 books on self-compassion for teens, including a soon-to-be published book designed to teach self-compassion to teens in schools. I'm really grateful to have you with us, Karen. And we are also here with Lisa Bayless. Lisa is a teacher, a counselor, a speaker, and a mom. She currently works as the education director at the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, and she's the author of the book Self-Compassion for Educators. And she has a passion to spread self-compassion to caregivers, including teachers, parents, and more. So glad to have Lisa with us. We also have Christine Lathran. Christine is an MD, has a Master's of Science in Public Health, and is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina. Her research explores the benefits of mindfulness and self-compassion for well-being and close relationship health. And she is particularly interested in how self-compassion can be passed down intergenerationally between family members. And finally, we have Gabi Garcia. Gabi is a mama, a licensed professional counselor, and a picture book author. She spent over 20 years in the public schools serving K-12 students. And she's the author of Listening with My Heart, A Story of Self-Compassion, and The Friend I Need, Being Kind and Caring to Myself. So really glad to have all of these members of our panel with us, and glad to have all of you with us. And we're here because we're having a mental health global crisis for youth. So we were having a precipitous climb towards mental health challenges for youth, particularly adolescents and particularly girls, pre-pandemic, and then the numbers have more than doubled since the pandemic. And so we really need to have more resources for youth. And what we found is that self-compassion can help. It is a resource that helps kids with mental health challenges. And so a little bit about self-compassion I'd like to share, including the fact that, well, a simple definition, right? So self-compassion is essentially treating ourselves as we treat a friend when things go wrong. And because this is a panel for self-compassion for youth, I'm going to use my stuffed animals to explain the three components. So I have Spots the giraffe, who is the symbol for mindfulness, right? So we can, when we're struggling in the context of self-compassion, mindfulness helps us to spot, that's my spots, to spot what we're feeling. And so this means that instead of getting over-identified with story or dismissing our struggle, we're able to mindfully say, this is a difficult moment, and notice how it feels in our bodies. Second component of self-compassion, buddy. You are not alone. And actually, I find this one is the easiest for kids to pick up. So a differentiator between self-compassion and self-pity is that self-pity says, oh, poor me. Self-compassion says everybody struggles sometimes. So the struggle might be different, right? And honestly, there's truthfully some people that experience more adversity than others. And yet the commonality is that we all struggle sometimes. And then our final component is kindness. And I've actually got two stuffies for kindness. So oftentimes people are they're most familiar with this component of self-kindness, which is the snuggles, right? We can give ourselves a little kind touch, give ourselves a little love and support. I'm here for you, right? So self-compassion involves that gentle form of being there for ourselves when things go wrong. But it also involves Doodles the dolphin. Oh yeah, we can do something when we're struggling. So we don't just need to snuggle ourselves. Sometimes we need to get out there, gather resources, solve problems, call a friend, take care of our bodies. And all of these actions are also part of the self-kindness portion of self-compassion. Whew. So now that we all know what self-compassion is, I'd love to hear members of our panel share a little bit about their work in the field, their work with both in the field of like their professional lives, perhaps also in the field of their home lives. A lot of us are parents. So in particular, what challenges are you finding? And then also, how does self-compassion help? Like what are you noticing are like helpful interventions to address those challenges that you're finding? So we'll start with Dr. Karen Bluth. So Karen, go ahead.
Thanks so much, Jamie Lynn. And I never met all your animals. So thank you. That was just a joy. That was really a joy to meet all of them. So yeah, when I teach teens mostly, and when we teach teens, um, the the main thing that I really want them to know is that this world that you are growing up in is a really difficult, challenging, often unhealthy place. It's unhealthy for adults, and it's certainly unhealthy for teens, for younger people who don't necessarily have the coping skills yet. So this world that we live in doesn't support the kinds of things that we really need to make us feel fulfilled and to make us feel happy and to make us feel successful. So, for example, basic things that we need as human beings is to feel connected, to feel accepted, to feel part of a group, to feel like we belong. And unfortunately, this world that we live in is filled with um, and emphasizes competition and comparing ourselves with others. This is particularly comes out with social media. So yeah, social media is a perfect setup to compare ourselves with others, right? So the one thing that I really, really want teens to know, and I frequently say, is that this is not your fault. You may feel anxious, you may feel depressed, you may feel sad, you may feel lonely. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. This world that you're living in doesn't support what you need as a human being. So the common humanity piece that you were mentioning, Jamie Lynn, is particularly important for teens because what that really stresses is that the struggle that you're going through isn't because of you, isn't because of something that you've done. This is something that we all experience, all of us as human beings at some point or another feel left out or feel lonely or feel sad or depressed or anxious or whatever. So that's an important message and a challenge for all of us that we want to get across, and that self-compassion can help, and that particularly uh, knowing that you're not alone can really help alleviate that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Karen, so much for highlighting that very real struggle that our society is not necessarily supporting, created to support the well-being of teens, and how, again, we can as caregivers remind them that they're not alone and it's not their fault. Thank you. So next, Gavi, would you like to share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Okay. So one of the things that I noticed, I spent many, many years working in public schools with kids, and one of the things I noticed there, and that I notice now as a parent with my 10-year-old, is that as she's gotten older, she is on the one hand facing a lot of those struggles that Karen just touched on. She's facing more and more of those, but also she's um, less receptive to my input a lot of times, and when it comes to self-compassion, um, and so I noticed that, and like I said, at home and in the schools. So one of the things that I am learning, and that I try to put into place um, at schools, is being a better listener, listening to what they're saying. I think it can be really easy as a parent to get in the mindset of, I need to fix or change something in that moment, when really what kids are needing is empathy. Um, and the more I listen to what's going on with her and with others, the better that they're able to tune into their experience, what's going on for them. And so, I think it's been a learning and a growth process for me, that we're not always there, or we're not there to fix. We're there to listen, and that helps them listen to what's going on internally. So it helps them just be more mindful of what's going on for them.
Wow, thanks so much, Gabi, for that really important reminder, right? So often we're like, what do I need to do? And what you're reminding us is that what we need to do is we need to be present, we need to be listened, we need to listen, we need to be attuned. So thank you for sharing that. And Christine.
Thanks, Jamie Lynn. I think what I would say is kind of a mix between what both Karen and Gabi have mentioned. That for me as a parent and caregiver, noticing and being with difficult feelings has not always been easy for me. And for many of us as parents, it can be hard depending on our experience as children, whether we can talk about how we feel when we're feeling it and feel easeful with that. Also, as Karen was mentioning, our current lives are so busy and so distractible. We're so distractible. And often we think that maybe sometimes we have the perception that things should be more easeful, right? So We can get online and click a button and get all sorts of information so quickly. So it should be easy. So maybe when I'm feeling bad or I'm feeling sad or anxious, maybe that means something's wrong with me, right? And I think I get into that mindset sometimes, what I would say with self-compassion and what I've learned from caregivers who have taken self-compassion classes is that learning self-compassion as a caregiver allows you, first of all, like Gabi was saying, to notice and to listen to both yourself when you're having a hard time, not bypass it, not distract yourself, not shame yourself or criticize yourself for feeling a difficult feeling, but also really attune to your child when they're having a hard time. And then having some vocabulary, some really useful vocabulary for processing the difficult emotion. And this vocabulary can be very personalized. That's what I love about self-compassion. So you can find the words that comfort. You can find or think about the things that you might need in that moment that might be different in a different moment or for a different person. So those are the things I would say, the way self-compassion can address some of those challenges. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. I really appreciate you highlighting those points, including the fact and that tendency that we all have to blame ourselves when we're struggling, right? And there's actually nothing that can make a difficult problem worse than thinking that we're having it because something's wrong with us. And that's exactly why we need self-compassion, to remind ourselves that we're not alone, that we all struggle, and that it's okay to feel this way. So thanks for sharing that. And finally, Lisa.
Thanks, Jamie Lynn. And wow, what a great panel of experts we're hearing from right now. So I also spent 20 years in education, in classrooms, and as a counselor in schools, working a lot with teenagers. And I'm a mother of 2 teenagers right now. And so I understand how deeply hard it is when we see our kids suffering. And I think I want to layer on what Gabby and what Christine were saying too, and how I know. Just yesterday I was driving home with my daughter and she said, "Oh, Mom, I felt like such a loser." And we hear our kids say this, and right away we have this instinct to be like, "You're not a loser, you're fine, you're wonderful," and to fix. And as Gabby said, our kids aren't fixed. They're not broken. They're just feeling a difficult emotion at a certain time. And so what a lovely gift for myself to sit and hold that and be like, I don't need to change you or fix you. It just is a hard moment. And I think this is one of the best things we can learn when wanting to support our children, our teenagers in this mental health crisis, is acknowledging our struggles. Suffering is a part of what we are going to experience for ourselves and for our kids. And actually, it's okay for them to struggle because this is how they learn resiliency. And so I think that's one of the big things that I have learned too, as a parent, as an educator, and working with educators, is allowing that little bit of difficulty to settle in a little bit more, allowing our kids to recognize they have the capacity within themselves to meet themselves when it's hard. And I think of a story that I had with a student at one point. I was working as a counselor, and we'll call her Grace, and she came in, and Grace was one of these students I know, or these kids, it may even be somewhere similar to what you see, is someone who's really hard on themselves, coming in and saying, "I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough." I'm, this negative self-talk we hear so much with our children, because as Karen was saying, we're comparing ourselves in a world that's just unattainable. And I remember sitting with Grace at one point and just saying, like, "This is so hard for me to hear you talk about yourself that way. You're such an incredible kid. But what you're saying and these words that are coming out of yourself, they're really hurtful. I'm curious," I said to this student, do you have any little people in your life?" And she said, "Yeah, I have a niece that I look after all the time." And I said, "Would you say those words out loud to your niece, to this little person?" And she looked at me, she's like, "No, I would never tell anyone else in the world the words I'm saying to myself." And so we had that moment, and I said, "But you're listening, your own heart's listening." And we had this practice of saying, let's stop some of the negative self-talk, the things, or let's catch ourselves, Jamie Lynn's giraffe, the mindful awareness. And can we maybe find a little bit of kindness instead? Or can we at least notice when we're being so critical and say, that's not helping me right now? And so I think when we're always looking for teaching opportunities, as a teacher, as an educator, I'm always looking for those opportunities. Where can we reframe? Where can we reconnect? And this student at the time, this young girl that I'm saying is Grace, she looked at me and she just said, I don't want to talk to myself that way anymore. And we spend a lot of time working together and changing that. So this is an invitation, as for parents, for caregivers, for teachers, for counselors, it's just an invitation to remind us, how can we reframe our conversation sometimes? And then how, as both Gabby and Christine said, how can we sit in it when it hurts our heart? Well, that is the practice of our own compassion, so we can be with the kids who need us so much in our own personal presence. So just a little bit of a reframe on the practice that we can use with our kids.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. And I think it's really important for all of us to, like, I know for myself personally, because we can tend to hear the second part of what you said, which is, would you say this to someone else? And that's important. That's actually like a self-compassion practice, right? Asking kids, would you say this to your friend? But if you had said that before you really paused, before you were with your own feelings that you had hearing her say that, and before you helped her be with how it was for her to say that, any intervention would have been ineffective, right? Because all they would have heard is you pushing back on what they were saying. And so I really appreciate how you stress the importance of that, being with their difficult comment compassionately, and how much self-compassion you had to have in order to create space for that difficult comment.
Thanks, Jamie Lynn.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa.
And I just want to acknowledge too what Gabby said earlier too. As parents, it's harder. Our kids don't want to hear from us as much. I noticed yesterday when my daughter was saying this, it didn't matter what I said. So I felt like my own presence of calmness and what you're saying of holding her space was more valid in that moment than trying to say, you're not this, or you're this, or how can I help? It was just like, yeah, shoot, that's really hard right now. Sorry you feel that way.
Thanks, Lisa. And we will be sharing, for those that are curious where we're going with this conversation, we'll be sharing a little bit more about tips and also steps that we can follow to help our kids to grow self-compassion. But first, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Karen Bluth, just for a little bit to hear about, sometimes it's helpful to know the science, right? We know that kids have these problems. People say self-compassion helps, but what does the research look like around self-compassion and children and teens and adults? Can you share a little bit about that, please, Karen?
Sure. So what we know from meta-analyses for adults and also for teens, and the meta-analyses are a review of studies, a summary of studies. What we know, and it's very clear, that the more self-compassionate people are, the less they experience anxiety, depression, and stress. And we've seen this in a number of meta-analyses. Two with teens and several with adults. Um, we also know that when teens are more self-compassionate, um, they don't get as stressed from everyday hassles, everyday things that are going on. They don't get as depressed as they age through adolescence. What we know is that as teens get older, they tend to get more depressed, but those teens who are more self-compassionate don't get as depressed. This is particularly true for girls, more true for girls than for boys. We also know that for those teens who are depressed, they're less likely to self-injure when they're depressed. So we see that in a couple of different studies. We also know for teens who, when they're experiencing stress, they're less likely to get depressed if they're more self-compassionate. Um, we also know for those teens who experience a particularly traumatic event, they're less likely to develop PTSD or anxiety or suicidal ideation symptoms if they're more self-compassionate. We just did a study recently where with teens who had some suicidal ideation symptoms. And what we saw across the study was that, and this is a study where we taught teens self-compassion, that their suicidal ideation symptoms decreased significantly across the study. So most of what I just talked about were correlation studies. So studies where what happens when teens are more self-compassionate. So what we know overall is that they're less depressed, less anxious, less stressed, less likely to develop these different negative outcomes and negative developmental trajectories. But we also know, as Jamie Lynn was talking about earlier, was that you can grow self-compassion. So you're not stuck with the amount of self-compassion that you were born with. You can cultivate self-compassion in your own life. And we have different programs where we teach teens, and Jamie Lynn's program teaches younger kids how they can develop their own self-compassion, how they can grow their own self-compassion. So in our teen program, we've seen across a number of different studies now, we've seen that teens who take our program have experienced less anxiety, depression, and stress at the end of the study compared to where they were at the beginning of the study. And as I just mentioned, fewer suicidal ideation symptoms also. A couple of just quick anecdotes, things that teens have said during these studies, and particularly at the end of the studies. I remember one teen who was being hospitalized for eating disorder, an eating disorder, said she hadn't said much during the course of the program, but at the end she said, this was really eye-opening. This was really eye-opening to me. And I think for a lot of teens, it is just that, because teens are so used to being hard on themselves. They're so used to beating themselves up. They're so used to having these really high standards for themselves. And they feel like if they don't, that their lives are going to fall apart. They're not going to get into the university, or they're not going to get a good job or whatever. And so for this particular teen, it was very eye-opening that she didn't have to beat herself up in order to be a good person, in order to be happy, or in order to be successful. Another one of my favorite things that a teen said was, and I think it's because of the way he said it, it really struck me, and actually also struck all the other teens who were sitting there. He just kind of looked up and said, I don't care if other people don't like me. I like me. It was just so great. All of us were like, wow, that's awesome. So, yeah, so that's just some of the research, quantitative research, and also some qualitative research on self-compassion, and particularly self-compassion with teens.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Karen. And I appreciate that you highlighted two things, right? Two things are true. One, having more self-compassion creates more mental, emotional health, right? And two, if you're having already mental or emotional health struggles, doing a self-compassion intervention can help to lessen the challenges that people are having. So I really appreciate that. Those things are both true. So no matter where we are in the spectrum as caregivers of children, there's something we can do. And so, and by the way, I also saw in the kind of the comment section here that there's some questions about programs, and also we have some friends from Africa that are with us, which is wonderful. And just so you know, we'll be talking about, like, that's one of the things we'll talk about in a little bit, is like what resources are available for interventions. But first, I'd like to share a little bit about steps that we can take to help kids grow self-compassion, like from the cradle on, right? And we're never too late, right? We are never too late. So no matter where you are in your parenting journey or caregiving journey, just know it's never too late. So the first step that we have to have in order, and I have a number of blogs. We'll be also sharing resources, and one of the blogs talks about these 4 steps. It's in the resources. But the first step is simply for the caregiver to grow their self-compassion. And what's good to know is that we don't have to do this like in isolation. Like, let's say you have a 10-year-old who's beating themselves up and you beat yourself up. The two of you can learn it together. And in fact, being a co-learner, being like, yeah, I struggle too, I'm on the learning team, that's the second step. The second step is modeling self-compassion for kids. And modeling self-compassion means that we do all of the three components, right? It means one, mommy, daddy, teachers having a difficult moment. We normalize that we all struggle. Just showing kids the resource can make them feel isolated, but letting kids know that you struggle too can help them to know they're not alone, right? Which is, again, our second component, buddy, right? You're not alone. So the modeling involves being able to name struggle, helping kids know that they're not alone in having struggles, so important. But also modeling those self-kindness pieces, both the gentle and then also that stronger self-compassion, right? So, and if you don't have those gentle and those strong voices, one, you can model struggling with self-compassion, right? Like right there, you can always do it. And two, you can grow it. You can grow it. And so we'll be sharing a little bit about resources for grownups growing their self-compassion, including in tandem with kids. Once you've got that resource down, or not once, like in parallel, step 3, be the voice you want kids to internalize. So kids are always learning from what we say to them. And this can be really humbling because sometimes the words that we're saying aren't the words that we want our kids to be internalizing. And I know this is true for me too. So I learned gentle self-compassion first, and then I learned strong. And so when I learned strong, I started to say to myself when I was struggling, like, okay, I actually call myself, oh, baby girl. I don't always do this, but I'm just going to use it. But you don't have to call yourself baby girl. But I'd be like, baby girl, like you are really struggling right now, right? Like you are really having a hard time. What do you need? Like, we need to get this project done. You're avoiding it. Like, how can I help you? Do you need to call somebody? And so I started to use this stronger voice with myself to motivate myself with kindness. And then when I would talk to my kiddo and she wasn't doing her homework, and for the 4th time, I'd be like, why are you not doing your homework? I'd say, this isn't the voice I want my kid to be internalizing. And so I would literally say to her, I'm sorry, that's not the voice I want you to internalize. You're having a hard time getting started on your homework. Is there a way I can support you? Right? So that voice that we use with our kids is what they're going to take in. And also when we fall short though, which we all do, we need to give ourselves compassion. There's no perfect caregiver. And then the final step is actually that explicitly teaching the skills of self-compassion, which again, sometimes as people have shared, can be harder for kids to hear from their own personal caregiver, right? Their parents, they're the closest guardians of them. And yet there's strategies that can be helpful. So we'll share a few tips about that as well. So I'm just going to invite members of our panel to share a little bit more about their own experience with these 4 steps. And I'm going to kind of lump steps 1 and 2 together, which is caregiver grows self-compassion and caregiver models self-compassion. And our panel actually got together on Monday for a little practice session. And Dr. Christine Lathran shared like a phenomenal example from her own home. So I'm actually going to call out Christine and see if you'd be willing to share with the group a little bit about how you were able to bring some self-compassionate modeling and common humanity to a situation at your own home.
Sure. So I shared a story. I have a 16-year-old son who made a mistake. And the mistake was pretty public. And the adult who caught him in this mistake was really shaming with him. And he was feeling really angry. And the anger, we were talking about how angry he felt. He just felt so angry at the situation and how he was being unfairly treated. And so we were talking about the feelings that he was having about the situation. And then I paused and I said, did I ever tell you about the time when I made a mistake? And he stopped in his tracks and he looked at me, and he just was so interested to hear my mistake. And I told him a story of when I made a public mistake and all of those difficult feelings that I had in that situation. And luckily, my partner was close by and he chimed in with his mistake. So as we're talking about the common humanity of, oh, mistakes happen. You are definitely not alone in this. The conversation changed quite quickly from this anger that he was expressing to then him being able to much more easily express the other more soft feelings that he was feeling, including sadness, worry, embarrassment, and it was completely normal. You know, we talked about how it was, of course, he was feeling all those things. It makes sense that you'd feel that way. And I'm so sorry it's hard right now. But until I said the words, did I ever tell you about the time when, and just kind of fessed up about, gosh, let me tell you about my mistake, I don't know if we would have gotten to those softer feelings. So it was a really powerful moment.
Thanks so much, Christine, for sharing that. Again, a powerful reminder to join kids in the struggle rather than, try to necessarily be the parent that's got it all together all the time. So I'm curious if either Gabi or Lisa, either one of you want to chime in on this topic of modeling and growing like the caregiver self-compassion.
Sure. I'll go, and then Gabby, please jump in too. Most of the work that I do these days is really sharing self-compassion for educators and for parents. So how do we really practice it ourselves? And so understanding it and experiencing, I love, Jamie Lynn, you talked about, doing it in tandem or with the kids that we're with, but also creating the space for us to learn it ourselves, really understanding our own experience. Compassion arises, or self-compassion arises when they're suffering. So we have to recognize that to be able to practice self-compassion, we need to be aware of our own struggles, our own hurts, as Christine said, our own challenges. And so finding that way to learn it, whether it's in a group or on your own or with people, so you can then model it, embody it and then model it. So when our kids are coming to us and they're experiencing challenges, and I think we really all stated this in the beginning, we're not there to fix them or to change them or to make it easier. Christine's example is like, we can't fix the pain you're experiencing. We're just going to allow you to recognize that it's normal. There's some emotional intelligence in just sitting with it, and in holding that with our own level of compassion and care. We can often, as parents and even as teachers, get reactive. We want things to go a certain way. I think earlier Christine said taking the word should out of things. There's no making things in any direction. So really helping our children and ourselves meet each and every situation with whether, Jamie Lynn says, whether it's either gentle and kind and caring and sort of the soft parts or the strong part of compassion. There are different ways we can practice that. And I think the biggest piece in there is modeling it. And we can't model what we don't understand and what we don't embody. So if we want our kids to truly go through these practices and to, self-compassion as a mindset, it's how we show up in the world, then as the adults, we also really need to practice them. I think this is the most important thing, that how we are in the world, what is our mindset, how are we meeting them? And it doesn't mean we don't make mistakes. We're all human, like my kids still say to me, Mom, you're using your angry voice. And I'm like, oh, right, let's turn down that dial because I don't mean to, and I apologize. And then we start again. And I think there's this beautiful permission of being human. And I think that's the piece I love around common humanity too, is that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to, screw up. And it gives us permission to showcase that, to model it, like Christine's example of saying, here's when I got it wrong. And I'm still okay. And I'm still, showing up in a perfectly imperfect world, right? Like I'm doing the best that I can. And I think this is a really important gift that we can start offering our kids, instead of showcasing and highlighting perfection, instead showcasing our imperfections and how we manage to get through difficult things.
So what I'll add to that for me is that it's not just learning, but it's, especially as a parent, it's relearning it in order to match the stage where my child is. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess the parenting struggles when you have a 3-year-old are very different than some parenting challenges that you have when kids are maybe 10 or 12 or 15. And so for me, it's been about checking in with myself. And I'll give you a specific example that has to do with just appearance and the way that we look, because as you all know, women in our society get so much pressure around the way that we look, the way that we present ourselves, and um, and that was something that I have been very conscious about. Raising a daughter, raising a 10-year-old at this point, and so it's meant me examining my own thoughts about how am I modeling this? I have always tried to be intentional with showing love to every part of myself, especially, I'll always talk about, loving my round belly because that was her first home, and just never shying away from that. But it shifts as my daughter has grown. So even though it's a practice that I learned, you know, 12 years ago, I find that I'm having to readjust it and check in with myself as my daughter is growing.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Gabi. And for naming that challenge. Actually, I see one of the questions that we have in the comments here is about how do we deal with teens that, or children that are really focused on appearance, and of course we're gonna want to model it, but we're also going to want to use all those components of self-compassion, including always the delicate balance of helping kids know, one, their struggle is really normal, and then two, sometimes truthfully, the way we relate to things compounds struggle, and so it's this delicate balance of meeting kids where they are, helping them to realize that their struggle is very common, but then also helping them develop a little bit of wisdom so that they can see what kinds of ways of relating to themselves might be more helpful. So before we get to I want to leave some time for questions, and also name that some of these questions are really deep, and that I'm going to be sharing also a resource where you can list more of your questions, and then members of our panel can answer them. We'll kind of like compile a little article answering questions that we can't get to. So just if we don't get your question answered, like there's a space where you'll be able to share it, because these questions really matter. The other piece I wanted to touch on, though, as far as helping kids grow self-compassion, is this idea of being the voice. I know we talked about a little bit of this already, but I'm just wondering if Dr. Christine Lathrain could just share a little bit about the research also on attachment, and how that relationship that kids have with their caregiver affects the development, or theoretically affects the development of self-compassion.
Sure. So we know from decades of research in the field of attachment that from the time of birth, the way that the caregiver, whether it be a mother, father, whoever's caring for that baby, that infant, the way that caregiver responds to the child when the child is in distress, when the child is struggling in some way, expressing some kind of need, has profound implications for how that child eventually sees themselves, how that child values themselves and sees themselves in relationships with others. This is long term, over the long term, as that child grows into adulthood. And how that child understands emotions and the importance of their emotions, and how that child begins to understand how to regulate difficult emotions. So there's also a big field of emotion socialization, where researchers have really begun to understand how caregivers' thoughts about emotion are important, how a caregiver feels about anger, and how a caregiver feels about sadness impacts how that caregiver responds to their child who is expressing anger or sadness, and how the caregiver talks about anger or sadness with that child. And that all of these opportunities to interact with the child, whether it be when the child's actually having a difficult emotion, or whether it be while they're reading a book together and emotions are being displayed in the book, all of these small interactions add up and help the child to learn about themselves and the world around them, and about how emotions work for them. So it's an invitation, it's an opportunity to look at the caregiver as a possible mechanism and tool and model for the child's emotional well-being. Again, remembering that we can't be perfect.
Thank you so much, Christine. And as I'm hearing you say that, it's making me think, yes, that importance of us as caregivers developing the resource. So even some of the questions that we might have, sometimes we want to think, what should I do for my child? But maybe part of what I should do for my child is work on the way that I relate to their struggles. And it also reminds me of the importance of repair, right? So like if I'm a parent who can jump in to fix it, or if I'm a parent that sometimes shames my child when they're acting out severely, okay, just saying hypothetically completely, right? Then I can say to my child after the moment, you know what I mean? Oh my gosh, I just shut you down. Or you know what? I noticed I have a habit of jumping into fixing because I'm uncomfortable sitting with your struggle. And I'm working on this too. And I'm sorry I'm not able to show up. You know, so we can really name the ways we struggle and practice and model self-compassion in that way. So I know some of us so as far as programs, I just want to touch briefly on programs, and then I think we're gonna have to go right into the Q&A stuff. And then maybe, I know if any of the panel members have some resources or tips to share, maybe we can do so also in combination with responding to some of the questions that we have. So as far as programs, which is one of the questions that was in the chat, like what programs can we use? I think that there's a lot of programs out there that are being developed. I know Dr. Karen Bluth and Dr. Christine Lathren are involved in all kinds of studies of different programs. The ones that I'm most familiar with are related to the Mindful Self-Compassion program. And also in our resources that we'll share there, we'll share the resources from the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. And there's 2 approved adaptations of that program. One is for teens, the Mindful Self-Compassion for Teens, and the other is for children, which is the Self-Compassion for Children and Caregivers programs. So those are 2 programs that are, have been researched and are approved adaptations of Mindful Self-Compassion, but there are certainly other programs, I'm sure, that could be effective with kids. I just personally can't speak to those. Although we can feel free to add, any members of our panel can add extra resources as far as programs. Additionally, we do have books listed in our resources. We have videos listed in our resources, because I know that not everyone is going to have access to a program. So I think those are also resources that we might want to consider that we can use while helping children and teens grow self-compassion. We have just 2 minutes before we shift to Q&A if anyone else wanted to add anything to that idea of resources.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in here, Jamie Lynn, to just continue to stress that reminder of there's resources for teens, but don't forget about yourself in this process. And, I see all my panels nodding here as, we generally have this desire to help or fix. And all of the questions that I'm seeing come up are these, like, how do I help this individual? So much of where we can be as helpers, as parents, as caregivers, as teachers, is in our presence, is in how we show up in the world, in our actual ability to be present and to be compassionate. And so when you're looking at programs for teens, don't forget to look at programs for yourself, whether you take them at the same time or start with you, because we know that an adult, most of our kids are learning from us. And so if we have the ability, the space, the time, and the capacity to integrate this into our own practice, there are many courses out there in the world. The Mindful Self-Compassion course is the one that Jamie Lynn and that we're talking a lot about, is based on the research of Dr. Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. Starting at the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion on a course for yourself where you can learn these practices and integrate them, so that the next time your child does come up and they're feeling all kinds of big, challenging emotions, you have some capacity for yourself to at least sit with it, so we don't get caught up into that cycle, into that circle. So we can work on, because we know most kids actually need another adult to regulate with. So it's called co-regulation. And that really makes a big difference when we have our own integrated practice. So if you're looking at programs, resources, and all those things for your kids, include yourself in that circle. It's a really important first step.
Yeah, and if I can just add on to what Lisa was saying, is that I am frequently asked by parents, what can I do to help my child? What can I do to help my teen? Um, my first response is always find a way to learn self-compassion for yourself. So I just want to reiterate that. And it's really, really, really hard to be a parent of a teen. um, I survived that period of my life, and my kids are now 29 and 31, and I'm here to say it gets a lot easier, but it's hard to stay regulated when your teen is feeling huge emotions, is feeling um, incredibly sad or incredibly anxious. So yeah, so take care of yourself first, practice self-compassion first, and that's the most important thing I think that you can do. And then there's a number of other things. And if you can't take a course, Chris Germer and Kristen Neff have a wonderful workbook on mindful self-compassion um, that you can do.
Thank you. Thanks for that reminder. So our first response to any question that anybody's going to ask about kids, our first response is, how's your self-compassion practice going, right? Like, can you find some resources for yourself? Which I know as caregivers, we can find hard to do, but sometimes the motivation is, if I can help myself, it will help this child, right? And if so, let that be that motivation.
Well, and I just think about the level of burnout that our caregivers in the world are experiencing right now. And, there's a correlation with the stress level of the adults and the reason we're talking about, this huge increase in mental health with students, with kids, with teens, is because as adults, we're also not practicing. And I think, Jamie, like what you just said, there's so core to all of this is that at a global level, we all need more compassion for others and compassion for ourselves. And when we practice that, it's going to have those huge ripples out in helping our kids at a huge and global level. I think it's really important.
Thank you. So let's the first question that I see in the comment section is that is a question about a family member, like, to support a teen that has mild anorexia. So so curiosity amongst the people that are here with us is like, how do we use this with kids that are having maybe eating disorders? I see Karen, you've unmuted. Did you have something to share about that?
First of all, what we know from a meta-analysis that was done on randomized controlled trials, this is Ferrari 2019, that um, eating disorders and dealing with eating disorders is what self-compassion is, or dealing with eating disorders is particularly positively affected by self-compassion or through self-compassion. Self-compassion works really well with this particular population with large effect sizes. So obviously, I'm going to state the obvious, and of course, adults are adults want going to want to model self-compassion for your teen. And then also, just I think all of the things that we've been talking about here, that you're practicing your own self-compassion and then modeling self-compassion. Like and these opportunities, by the way, come up all the time because we make mistakes all the time, right? So you're cooking, you burn something, rather than saying like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do such a stupid thing? Just say, oh, wow, I wasn't paying attention. I burned something. I'm human. I'm human. Oh, I must have a lot on my mind. I must be really stressed. I'm going to take a moment. I'm just going to turn off the stove for a minute. I'm just going to sit down, just take a few breaths, just relax and give myself like a minute, 2 minutes to just relax before I get up. Just a way of taking care of yourself. And teens often don't look like they're paying attention to their parents. They are, trust me. They're watching and they pick up on that. And so, yeah, I think that's I'm seeing this theme that's coming out through this panel today, which is adults being self-compassionate, and then modeling self-compassion. Those are the best things that we can do. And then there's, of course, the direct ways of teaching self-compassion.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And something else I like to remind parents of too is to not just model the self-compassionate voice, but also be mindful of and speak aloud that critical voice. So if before you say, wow, I'm having a difficult moment, you have this thought of like, I'm such an idiot, you can name out loud to your kids, say, wow, I'm having the thought that I'm an idiot, but I know that's not true, right? So that also helps kids know what to do with the first thought and take any shame that they might have out of that first thought, and then teach them how to cultivate that next idea of how to practice self-kindness.
Sometimes what I do when I'm teaching teens is I'll actually take them through what's going on in my mind. So I'll make a mistake and I'll say something like, I have two choices right now. I can either say to myself, ugh, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do such a stupid thing? Or I can say to myself, whoops, I made a mistake. I'm human. I'm allowed to make mistakes. Now, what do I have to do to correct that mistake?
Yeah. So I think we might have time for one more question, and then again, I'm going to be giving a resource where we can list more questions and get more answers for people, so that everyone feels like. And if anyone who's watching the video later on wants to do it, we can also make sure you know about these resources. So there's a question, and by the way, some of the resources too include websites of people in our group. Right, so you can see these different people's names. A lot of us have websites of the same name, and feel free to reach out to us. Email us your questions. You know, we can try to help in any way that we can. We care about you. We care about your kids. So I'll take. There's a couple other questions about comparison and anxiety, but I think I'll choose this last question here because it's a little different topic we haven't touched on yet, and that's, how do you deal with a teen who lacks concentration? Right? So like, how does self-compassion relate to this, this challenges that kids sometimes have focusing or organizing their time? I do happen to know that Dr. Bluth wrote a book with somebody on ADHD. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in, but we just have 2 minutes here, or if anyone wants to address this last question.
Unless somebody
Aaron,
else
you take
wants
it
to.
away. No, I was just going to say, I think the only thing that comes up here for me is the first thing is like, we all lack concentration at different times. And I want to give that permission of like, and it's hard, right? And what do we do to create the refocus? But I know Karen's got the research on the self-compassion and ADHD, but one of the things that I want to just like, what else can we celebrate when it's good? We tend to go to the things that are wrong and the things that are hard and all the times. And I'm also curious around, what is that child doing well? How are we celebrating when they are concentrating? What does that look like too? But Karen, you go ahead.
Great, Karen. And we've got 1 minute for you now. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to make this really quick. First of all, first thing I would say is we live in a world that cultivates distraction. And there are books about this. There's a really great book by Johann Hari all about this. It's called Stolen Focus. That's the first thing. So it's not completely our fault, or might not be our fault at all, because of the world we live in. The second thing is mindfulness is really optimal for helping to focus, helping with focus. And so that's also a part of self-compassion, of course. And the other piece where self-kindness can come in is when we're beating ourselves up. And this comes out a lot in the book that I did with Mark Burton on ADHD, is that when we're beating ourselves up for losing a homework for the third time, or not getting a project done in time, or whatever, self-compassion can be really helpful. So not saying those mean, nasty things to ourselves, but rather cultivating a kinder voice, but a voice that doesn't let us off the hook for not doing our homework.
Great. Thank you, Karen. And it reminds me of these two, right? So with any struggle our kids are having, how can we both help them to be kind to themselves, realize they're not alone, and how can we help them to build the resources they need to be able to, to address the struggles they're having. So I just want to thank you all. We are at time. Thank you all for those of you who are joining us. So glad that you're here. Thanks for caring about you. Thanks to our panel members, and thanks to the Global Compassion Coalition for giving us this space today to be with and share about self-compassion for youth and how it can help with youth mental health.